Previously on Strange Resort. I've been invited to visit the abandoned town of Desperation, Nevada, a community that was devastated by violence and disaster back in 1996. My contact with the Bureau of Land Management was supposed to meet me at the entrance, but he sent me a text instead. I was supposed to meet an anthropologist named Roger Finham, but first I bumped into a strange man who dropped a key and then disappeared around a corner. At last I finally met Professor Finham, who helped me learn more about the tragic past and the murders that took place. And now, welcome back to Strange Resort, the podcast that lurks in the shadows of otherwise sunny vacation destinations. I am your host, George Hatfield. And as I am walking to the municipal building, or the remains of the municipal building, I can't help but look at the dusty, weed-infested streets of this once thriving mining town and envision the chaos that took place in that summer of '96. Deputy Collie Andrean was born and raised in the hills of Wyoming. He grew up in a town with only two career options: work on the ranch or work in the mine. As a teenager, he didn't have much of an affinity for horses, so he put on his helmet and tool belt and entered a mine shaft. But down in the darkness, looking for scraps of silver and copper, Andrean dreamed of a different life, a life of fresh air, sunshine, and by age 19, he left behind his family and his friends, said farewell to Wyoming, and traveled west. With only a few dollars in his pocket, he did not get far. He wound up in a dusty little hamlet known as Desperation. Most sheriffs back in the 1980s wouldn't take kindly to drifters loitering within the city limits. But town safety officer James Reed saw promise in the young man and suggested that Andrean get back on his feet by working for the Diablo Mining Company. Returning to the mine shaft was the last thing Collie wanted to do. But Reed kept tabs on the young man and would occasionally offer him the chance at police work whenever the opportunity arrived. It started with helping to break up fights at the Broken Drum, and Collie always made sure that the patrons of Buds and Suds never got behind the wheel if they were too drunk to drive. It didn't take Reed long to realize that Collie was born to be a lawman. There was no prouder moment in Andrean's life than when he put on his uniform for the first time. Deputy Andrean vowed to serve his community, and for several years he did. But in 1996, Andrean betrayed the town that looked to him for protection, and he stained the streets with blood. I'm speaking with anthropologist Roger Finham as we walk among these ominous ruins. So, as a scientist, how do you explain the connection between the discovery of the Kantaz and the violence that followed?
My main focus of study has always been the ancient ones, the unearthed and the unseen, the gods who use people as their playthings, as well as the cultures who built altars to those gods and then cowered before them.
And do you believe that Andrean became a plaything of an evil god?
Sounds like you're a skeptic.
Well,
let me say it in a way that your little secular brain can understand. Imagine coming into contact with something that removes all inhibition, that strips away all self-control so that your most primal desires are finally set free.
Like taking ecstasy?
Yeah, a type of ecstasy. That'll work.
He goes on to elaborate. Ripton's greatest desire was to keep his discovery secret, so he eliminated everyone on his crew. Josephson desired to take photographs like no other, and so he created his own hellscape as a backdrop. And then Collie Andrean. He wanted to become a sheriff, but why? To help others? Or to wield absolute power? Alright, so this contagious insanity begins when Ripton enters the rattlesnake shaft, but how does it transfer to Josephson and then to Andrean?
How did Judas betray Jesus?
That's a great Sunday school question.
You'll have all the answers you want when we're finished here.
However Andrean's insanity takes hold of him, it happens fast. He begins to open fire on an unsuspecting town, right in the middle of Main Street. Just days before this event, the population of Desperation was 217. Within a period of 72 hours, it drops down to 3. The 3 who remain are Billy Rancourt, a local drunk who may have been sleeping through all of these killing sprees. Audrey Weiler, a mining employee and geologist, heard the gunshots and took shelter hiding in the laundromat. And Thomas Billingsley, the town's veterinarian. He was captured and placed in a jail cell in the municipal building. Andrean did not stop there. After shooting motorists in his town, he cleared the vehicles from the main road, using some of the cars and trucks as barricades to continue to ensnare more victims. Eventually, Billy Rancourt came out onto the street and was run over, which makes me wonder, why was the vet, Tom Billingsley, spared and so many others were slaughtered? So do you believe that these 3 different men, the 3 different spree killers of Desperation, do you believe that it's possible that they were cursed for what happened to the Chinese immigrants?
Well, what do you think happened to those miners? Because there's been a lot of misconceptions.
Well, from the research I've done, the Diablo Mining Corporation seems to have caused the second collapse. So they murdered the Chinese workers.
No, that's just your typical liberal revisionist history.
Oh?
What actually happened back in 1859 was the exact same thing that happened in 1996. Those Chinese miners entered a realm not meant for mankind.
Okay. How can you be so sure?
I have seen the evidence. Documentary footage, you might say.
I haven't seen anything on Google.
Oh, you have to know where to look here.
We are now inside the ruins of a majestic old theater called the American West. Professor Fenham turns on an old projector, and I feel as though I am traveling back in time into a classroom in the 1970s. As I hear that projector sound, I imagine that I am about to watch a short cartoon featuring Donald Duck in Mathemagicland. But what appears on the screen is definitely not Disney. I've got a lot of questions. Like, how was this film made 30 years before the invention of the movie camera? But I don't want my skepticism to deter or disappoint the professor, who seems to believe in this film's authenticity. But I am interested in asking at least one thing. That word tack, T-A-K, I've never heard or I think seen that word before until today. I don't suppose it is an acronym for thanks and kindness?
You don't know tack? Don't they teach you nothing in school?
Feels good to laugh. Next, Professor Fenham tells me about his anthropological research. His main goal in coming to Desperation has been to discover concrete evidence of an ancient society, and to prove his theory, he is hoping to find some of the artifacts, the kantas, which were supposedly strewn around the town on that bloody weekend in June. And yet the authorities found no trace of these items. As we walk down the barren street, moseying past the Owl's Club and the Desert Rose Cafe, I try to imagine the carnage that happened in this town. And that is easy to do with Roger Fenham as my guide. Sometimes he speaks as though he has actually witnessed these atrocities. We enter the municipal building, and he points to a wall near the door.
This is about where Andrean shot Pete Jackson, point blank.
We walk up the stairs.
This is the spot where the sheriff pushed a 7-year-old girl down these steps.
On the second floor, we enter what once was the police department, complete with several jail cells. But now I can see that Professor Fenham has made himself at home in this space. And I have to admit, it looks rather cozy.
You just imagine you open up a bed and breakfast here. That'd make a podcast.
It would certainly be eclectic. Are these the cells where Anthropological's prisoners were kept? The survivors, I mean?
Oh, they didn't all survive. But yes, that dear old collie had as many as 6 people held captive here. And I bet you'll never guess how they escaped.
I don't know. How?
See that soap dish? One of the humans took a bar of soap, stripped down, lathered up his whole body from top to toe, said a prayer, and then slid right between these goddamn bars.
Well, that doesn't seem possible unless he was like very skinny or some of the bars were loose.
You could be Paul Bunyan and those bars wouldn't budge. Go on, give it a try.
All right. I am now moving into the cell, the same cell that once held the survivors of the Desperation tragedy. And the professor is right. These bars are rock solid. Wait, did you say one of the humans took a bar of soap?
Now, If you really want to get in touch with your spiritual side, George Hatfield, the best way to do that is to spend a whole night in this jail cell and then wait for them ghosts of desperation you so love to come visit you. Tack!
Well, that's not exactly how I work. Now, if you don't mind, Professor, letting me out.
Oops! Where did I put my keys?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I'll go find them. Oh, and I still need to show you the cantar.
Just please focus on getting me out of here.
Yep, lots to do. Find the keys, bring back the cantar, open up your cell door, snap your neck, hide the body, order a pepperoni pizza. So much to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is just beginning to occur to me that I am not good at this job. Whatever toxic gas or chemical that may have impaired the sanity of Andrean could still be at work here, and that Professor Finham might not be of sound mind. Or perhaps he just has a very twisted sense of humor. Now more than ever, perhaps it is time to consider and reflect upon the final events of Desperation. Because now, I feel like I can understand how easily it is to become ensnared by the authority figures we so easily trust. How were the survivors captured here, and more importantly, how did they escape? By June 23rd, 1996, almost the entire population of Desperation had been wiped out. But the violence did not end with the elimination of the townspeople. Collier and Tragian began driving up and down Route 50 in search of more victims. He laid out a trap which flattened all four tires of an RV. The Carver family, Ralph and Ellie and their children, David and Kirsten, ages 11 and 7, were on a road trip to Lake Tahoe. Once the RV ran over Tragian's spike strip, their vacation turned into a nightmare. Deputy Tragian arrived on the scene and rushed the Carvers into his patrol car on the pretense that there was a mad gunman within the vicinity. When the family arrived at the municipal building, Tragian murdered young Kirsten and then placed the remaining family members in these very cells, one of which I am now in. The vet, Thomas Billingsley, was also in here. All of them trapped and probably as scared and as confused as I am starting to feel right now. The deputy pulled over Pete and Mary Jackson. He arrested them under the false pretense of possession of marijuana, and according to the testimony of Mary Jackson after these events, in the middle of the Miranda rights, he said he was going to kill them. The Jacksons were also brought to the municipal building. Peter was shot at the foot of the stairs, and Mary was locked behind bars. Finally, Tragian pulled over a man on a motorcycle. This person was none other than Johnny Marinville, the award-winning novelist, the author of Delight, Song of the Hammer, and Tiburon. Some would say he was a man spoiled by success, married 4 times, occasionally charged with domestic abuse, and in and out of rehab. But before he was a best-selling fiction writer, Marinville was a war correspondent covering Vietnam. In the 1970s, he wrote amazing essays such as the working-class expose, Death on the Second Shift. Marinville was hoping to return to his nonfiction roots by riding his motorbike across the country and eventually compiling a collection of old and new essays called Travels with Harley. But instead, he was detained, and he too was brought into this jail, where I now sit on this cot, waiting for an anthropology professor who may or may not be losing his mind. I'm looking around and just wondering, could one of the survivors possibly have slipped through these bars? It's possible that maybe the 11-year-old, David Carver, could have been the one to do that, and so there is no chance that I am getting out that way. David must have slipped through the bars and found the keys. But by then, according to what I've learned, Andrean was showing signs of internal and external bleeding, and he had taken Mrs. Carver to the China Pit. Eventually, when the legitimate authorities combed the area, the deputy's body was discovered among the others in the field office. It was now down to David, his father Ralph, the vet, Mary, and the author, Johnny Marinville. From the municipal building, they sought shelter back at that abandoned movie theater, and apparently they planned to hide there until the encroaching sandstorm passed by. Before that happened, Tom Billingsley was attacked and killed by a cougar. Ralph and Johnny apparently went searching for Mrs. Carver, and both perished that night. Although the details are unclear, Ralph Carver's autopsy revealed that he had been attacked, his eyes had been plucked out, and a mangled carcass of a golden eagle nearby was the likely culprit. But author Johnny Marinville was never seen again. His body was not found among the hundreds of victims. I'd like to think Mr. Marinville is still out there, riding his Harley on some lonely stretch of road, free and far from desperation. Marinville, back in '96, wasn't exactly alone, however. He did have an assistant, a roadie that was following a few miles behind in a truck. His name was Stephen Ames, and he was a person used to working for rock and roll groups. But for Marinville, he was basically helping out with the man's lecture tour. Ames had picked up a hitchhiker named Cynthia Smith along the way, and then they received a call of distress on Steve's phone. Wait, that gives me an idea. Why am I sitting here when I could use my phone to call 911? Oh my God, I'm an idiot. All right, let's hope that we get a signal. 911. Oh, God damn it. Great. Yes, I've reached 911, which is apparently this very police station. Nothing else works here but apparently the landline. Where was I? This helps me. Just talking about this helps me. Oh, Steve and Cynthia, they rescued the survivors from the theater, and by then it was only David Carver and Mary Jackson. And it breaks my heart thinking about that 11-year-old boy. He had lost his sister, and then his mother, and then his father. Okay. 911 doesn't work, but I can still call for help. Let's hope that Jamie from the Bureau of Land Management can come to my rescue. Oh, Jesus. Is his phone here, too? It's under here, under the mat. It's coming from under the cot. Oh no. It's Jamie. Oh my God, it's Jamie. My only contact at the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you for watching and listening to the Stephen King Book Club. And as always, a special thanks to the constant watchers and #1 fans who support this channel. For more adventures of George Hatfield, assuming he survives, stay tuned for the next episode of Strange Resort.